Welcome to Directionally Correct, a People's podcast with Cole and Scott.
Today's guest, Dan George.
Hey, Directionally Correct fans, we're off this week, so here's a replay of a previous episode we thought you'd like. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter on Substack to get behind-the-scenes information, watch our videos on YouTube, or check out other episodes of the podcast on your app of choice. Thanks for listening. Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
There is a very interesting subset of individuals in Nashville that not only were in or still play music, but also played tuba, trombone, or trumpet that I know like personally around town. So it's a very real like additional silo that a lot of data analytics people actually get into, because music is very much in a similar discipline. If you think about it in terms of, mathematics, statistics, all that, they all come, founded by a bunch of rules that, have calculations. Well, music also has a ton of rules, right? You have keys, you have clefs, you have notes, right? And you have to combine the right notes to make it sound good, right? Kind of similar discipline. So I think a lot of people that were in music or just didn't really make it in music, like analytics, science, data, it's a pretty good tangent.
I never really considered the Nashville brass instrument scene either, right?
It's pretty huge. There's Tuba Christmas, there's brass choirs, there's all sorts of that. Maybe have you ever seen Tuba Christmas?
They have one in Dallas. So on I guess Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, all the Santas come out and they, play all the carols with tubas.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Have you ever been to that, Cole? Like Tuba Christmas?
I think this is one of those times where I'm just like, God, you guys are nerds.
I mean, I was a band nerd, like through and through. In high school, I was in the marching band. I marched around with a sousaphone. I hung out with the percussion section, and we were kind of the misfits of the marching band.
I mean, there is a stereotype of a person who, goes into band, and it's always, I guess it was famous from like American Pie, but it's like, a soft-spoken individual, but kind of crazy when they party. Was that kind of how you are, Dan, or does the shoe fit?
I don't know if I want to incriminate myself there, but I don't know if I've ever been soft-spoken, but I have definitely, really liked getting nerdy with, any type of music. I mean, for the longest time, and I don't know if it's still true anymore, but I held the highest number of perfect solo and ensemble tuba performances in the state of Indiana. I had 7 perfect scores.
Oh my God.
And that lasted for a while. But yeah, I mean, I got really into tuba.
Are there different archetypes between the brass players and say the woodwinds? Can you point them out different cliques?
Oh, for sure.
Rivalry
group and community. Oh yeah. And there are people that, kind of blend in here, blend in there, but for sure, large brass and percussion hang out a lot. I mean, this is my experience 20 years ago, but for sure, there's definitely cliques. But it's all typically relative to where you sit, within the band or orchestra, right? So the, large brass sits in the back right next to the percussion. We're kind of out. We're not in the woodwind section down front. So, and we don't play the melody, so we're all kind of in the back. Kind of goofing off.
Hanging out in the back. That's where it's at. I'll tell you my orientation to my 1 year in band. I was a trumpet player and absolutely hated it. I was no good, absolutely terrible, didn't practice, nothing like that. And I was second to last chair. And the only reason why I was second to last chair was because the last chair had behavioral issues. So
Well, at least you didn't
I
have
mean,
behavioral issues, Scott.
that's right.
Saving grace.
Yeah.
Saving grace. That's right.
Well,
Incredible.
well, how about I introduce you really quick, Dan? So beyond being a acclaimed 7-time award-winning Indiana tuba player,
Perfect
Uh,
score. Perfect score.
yeah, exact perfect score. Dan is also an award-winning HR, people analytics, and strategic workforce planning expert, as well as a former chief people officer as well, which I'm sure we'll dig into today. He's worked at some Fortune 100 enterprises as well as some growing mid-sized companies. He's an adjunct professor at Vanderbilt's Owen and Peabody graduate schools, as well as the chair of NTC's Analytics Summit coming up in Nashville, which, again, I'm sure we'll talk about. But thanks so much for joining us today, Dan, and being a part of the podcast.
Pleasure to be here, guys. I'm a huge supporter. I guess I'd say first-time caller, but I think I've listened to over 90%. There's only a few that I actually haven't listened to. So I'm just thrilled to be here. Obviously, love talking about these topics. So thanks for having me.
Any of the episodes you've been putting off for some reason that you didn't want to listen to?
No, actually, it's all there's probably a few old ones. I've definitely, I think everyone since February I've definitely listened to. I think there's just a few older ones that you got to scroll through the iPod app to get down to the bottom of them. But other than that, I listen to it every week for sure.
Well, and let's be honest, the early ones are painful to listen to. The audio quality is terrible. Scott and I hadn't really found our stride yet, so you're not missing out. Neither are our current listeners.
I will say the last few months have been really, really good. So I hope I live up to that. To that standard. So
some say we haven't hit our stride yet. So I feel it's not going to happen today.
This other podcast I listen to is literally called The Best One Yet. And they literally reference they do a daily podcast and they literally say, this is the best one yet every single time. So here we go. Maybe it's a T-boy.
Well, on a related note to being the best one yet, you're a triplet. Are you the best one yet out of the three? Like, how does that work?
I mean, obviously depends on what your criteria is. I definitely am the most probably professionally nerdy one. I have two brothers, right? Same age, triplet. I have a taller one and a shorter one. We're very fraternal. Some people can recognize that we look alike, but for the most part, if you saw us in a lineup, it'd be very difficult to kind of pick us out. My shorter brothers, him and his wife own a flower farm. He does customer experience. He's got a bunch of tattoos. My older brother's kind of like what you would call the Abercrombie jock. He's 6'2" or 3. I'm like 5'10", 11. So he's much taller, much stronger. Was always into sports. He definitely did a lot better there. So we're very different.
Where were you in birth order? I mean, obviously you're all born at the same rough time. But I mean, if I were born first, I'd hold it over everybody.
Oh no! So I was born first.
Oh
so
yeah.
Do that. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, these leadership qualities.
That's a claim to fame. Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to think that's where I started. Kind of the leadership aspects, right?
Who was it? A while back, somebody brought up the birth order stuff on the podcast. I don't know very much about it, but do you guys subscribe to that? What do you know about it, and does it make a difference, you think?
I think it does a little bit for sure. We fit pretty well into the typical psychologies behind it. I was definitely more kind of your type A for the longest time, but both my brothers were actually good students too. Just my brother Nick, the taller one, was really good at sports, and other brother Ben was kind of more creative and artsy. So yeah, but we've all done well professionally and are still like really close friends. So it's been fantastic to see that. But I've looked into psychology a couple of times. Actually, I've got to follow up. There's a twin study out of Louisville that actually includes us as triplets, and I've got to go interview that, I think, sometime this fall as a 20-year follow-up.
So a triplet, a part of a twin study. That's confusing.
Yeah, it's multiple birth thing, yeah.
I think there's some like really visceral stuff there. Not necessarily like of triplets or anything like that, but when the youngest child and there's a newborn come along and they become the middle child, I think there's some visceral instincts that know that they are going to be overlooked Like you see this in some sort of videos, and they tell a kid that they're going to have a little brother, and they like kind of flip out. There's something innate to the human condition where they know that their station life is not going to be the same.
Oh, absolutely.
We haven't covered this on the pod, but I'm actually a middle child. I suffer from.
Are you really?
Yeah, I have an insufferable case of middle childitis. So
I would have never guessed that.
Well,
I would have pegged you for firstborn for sure.
I don't know.
You got to fight for everything, right?
Yeah, you haven't seen me off the podcast yet, Dan. We'll change that later this year.
That's right. October, we'll change that. Okay. I'm excited to see that.
Well, why don't we go ahead and plug that really quick? That's one thing I'm pretty excited about, and I was happy to have you on the podcast, was this analytics summit coming up in Nashville. I'm going to be speaking. I know you're an organizer of it, and we're hosting a Nashville People Analytics and HR Technology meetup. So that's pretty exciting, and we'll get to meet each other in person and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and it's downtown Nashville, have you been to Nashville before?
Not in a long time. I haven't been. I went a few times in college and graduate school, but I haven't been back since.
It's a great town.
Yeah, it's a booming, thriving city now. It's crazy how far it's come along. So I did Vanderbilt undergrad there, 20 years ago or so. And so now that we're back and living here since, 10, 11, 12 years, it has just continued to grow. So you'll be excited. It's shocking for most people to see the downtown because they just don't typically associate Nashville with this kind of thriving downtown city area. And it really is truly, but that's one of the things why the Analytics Summit works so well. We've got a ton of industry there that people kind of forget about. There's a lot of healthcare. And if you're in healthcare, you probably know that Nashville's, kind of one of the epicenters. But outside of that, we've got music, obviously we've got automotive, and then just a bunch of other suppliers. It's a fantastic place to live. And so the Analytics Summit's great because we've got 4 or 5 universities that are close. So we've got lots of doctors like you guys. We've got lots of industry professionals, and it's just kind of a new booming place. And so I've been part of this group for about 8 or 9 years and chair it for a couple. And so we'll probably get 700, 800 people to come and talk about analytics. And it's not a, for-profit community meetup, right? It's the Nashville Technology Council is just for people doing IT, data, and analytics. So we get a lot of people that just present for free. They talk about what they're doing, and it's just an amazing community of individuals. So get excited; it should be a lot of fun. And we've got about 10 or 15% that's going to be people analytics this year.
Yeah, that's a great ad. Scott, have you spent much time in Nashville?
I went through Nashville one time. I think I was going to Chicago, traveling from Louisiana to Chicago. Wonderful city. You got that was Broadway. It's amazing, the music scene there. All the pubs up and down, and there's like a T intersection. Obviously, you got the Titans, the Nashville, Tennessee Titans right there. So I mean, it's a big city. I also like one of my secret sort of bits is like I try to sneak on to different football fields. So whenever I pass a D1 stadium, I try to get in. I got on the Vanderbilt football field to run around, check it out for a while. This has been several years, so hopefully the statute of limitations is expired by now.
I'm sure.
That's actually pretty funny.
Oh yeah, I've gotten on the.
I just kind of like that. Go, you collect these pictures and post them somewhere.
I don't post them. You got to protect the innocents. But yeah, I got onto Alabama's field, all over Texas. Essentially every D1 school in Texas. But this has nothing to do with the actual Nashville meetup at all. It's not a Scott joke.
No, that's fine. I'm actually curious, Dan. Are you a Nashville country music fan?
Yeah, I like country. I mean, it's not one of the typical genres I search out for to go out on a Friday night. But believe me, having moved there years and years ago, I definitely got into it. I do like country, but I also like classical. I like rap. I like electronic music. So I kind of listen to a lot of it. And but if we're downtown on a weeknight, for sure, I definitely want to hear some country.
Oh man, can you play any rap songs on the tuba?
I think I did a cover of one of Dr. Dre's 2001, like a long time ago. But it's been a little while since that. Maybe I'll I'll see if I can pull that together, and I'll send you a video.
Instant street cred. Well done,
Oh
sir.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. Well, maybe at some point we'll actually talk about, people analytics or something.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But well, Dan, actually, I'm curious. It was something I thought about leading up to this, but we hadn't actually chatted about. Is you're kind of one of those engineer / MBAs that got into this space. So we talked to a lot of IO psychologists, and the people that aren't IO psychologists usually have some kind of like social science or maybe data science background. But your background's pretty unique in this space. Why did you get into people analytics in the first place, and then why move up the whole HR chain and become a chief people officer? And then we can kind of get to your firm here in a little bit too.
Yeah, that's fine. No, great question. It is a kind of a random story. As an engineer in college, I was really kind of into the automotive industry. I like cars. I still do. And I was pretty much going to become a mechanical engineer and look to be a product designer for the automotive industry. But when I graduated in 2005, there weren't a ton of jobs there. So people were like, no, the next best thing for engineers is typically go into IT and or consulting. So I applied, got a job at Accenture, and kind of took off from there. So I arrive and they're like, all right, what's my first client? I thought it would be some sort of industrial client kind of in around the Chicago area. And they're like, no, you're going to go to a telecommunications client and you're going to do an SAP e-recruiting implementation of this massive telecommunications client.
That sounds absolutely miserable, by the way, but keep going.
Yeah, it did too. To be honest, and I don't say this very often, I can't believe I'll probably say this now, I had a little bit of a cry because I was like, oh man, this is not what I signed up for. I really wanted to do engineering. But as odd as it sounds, I got in there, I started doing the requirements gathering, I started working in the systems. We started noticing just like such a large gap, and all the data that comes in, they were doing something like 3 million job applications a quarter, and they were doing nothing with that data. They would just lose it. And as soon as they had another job, they'd just go back out, and they would just never, they didn't have any talent pools. They didn't have anything pulled together in this massive company of all these resumes. And so we started working with the data, and I just kind of got into it more and more. And the biggest thing that I found out that I really loved about it is you get to practice the science of engineering and IT and technology, but then there's this crazy chaos that people bring in to this equation, right? A ton of emotion, aspiration, motivation, all these things that just make that equation so much more complicated, but also insanely interesting. And to be honest, that's just kind of where it took off from there.
I mean, like as a CPO, like I've been fascinated with this idea that there's all sorts of books on like what people should do, right? You got to be prepared and like all this sort of stuff. But what are the biggest downfalls that you've seen from other folks that just like didn't make it, or where did they go wrong?
I've always been kind of a more business focused individual, hence kind of like why I went back to get my MBA after consulting. But I love the intricacies of business and then how people play a big part of that. Everyone's favorite term is, our people, our biggest, most valuable asset. But, and it's a great punchline, but very few firms actually practice it.
Yeah, it's like,
holistically.
If I never heard that again, I'd be fine.
Oh, for sure.
It's
Our
just
people are
so
our greatest
trite.
aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the typical Max Bloomberg, line too. I really do agree with him on that front. Like, firms are willing to extend as much as they can up until the point where the shareholders or the owners are like, well, we're kind of spending too much on people, or we're kind of doing too much work here, so let's scale back. And so, kind of to answer your point is, I think there's a very real way of combining this, where the business needs to be successful, but you also need to provide people with the right tools, the right training, the right environment, the right culture. Like, there are all these things that have to click for a firm to be successful. And having the background in analytics and being able to kind of talk about that, also having the skill set of like a human resources business partner, HRBP, combining all that together with the business, you've got to be able to work all those angles at any point within the day to prioritize what needs to get done. And sometimes that's working with a group that has an issue with their manager. Sometimes that means, looking at the dashboards to make sure that, some of the metrics are looking good for the board meeting. And then other times you're like, okay, the business is doing well here. It's not doing well here. I see their numbers. I see our numbers. How do we kind of mix all that together? And so, I found it to be completely rewarding. If I were to pick one that I didn't really love, it'd probably be the HRBP aspect of it. But that's just me.
Are you a Max Blumberg fan?
Yeah, for sure. I think he's got a lot of good stuff to say. Are you? You are.
Yeah,
you both are.
I do have a mea culpa of sorts. A few episodes ago, I called him a jackass. He is a friend.
Yeah.
I think some people interpreted that the wrong way. Max, if you're out there listening, I love you, and I don't think you're a jackass. I think you're great. So thanks.
I didn't take it that way. I thought it was a term of endearment. I love if you called me a jackass. So
yeah, but he's a friend. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
Well, I want to take it back though here because I love the perspective of being a chief people officer. Sometimes used to be called a CHRO, but they took out a letter, which I think is great. Not too many letters is, But you came from a people analytics background into that position. And I think a few times we've talked about on here and a few articles I've written and many other people have talked about this as well, is like perhaps the future of the people analytics leader would be to move into that chief people officer role. But we haven't seen a lot of that happening. You're one of the few out there that I've noticed, at least, that has made that kind of transition. Can you tell us about that? Did people analytics equip you to do the job effectively? What did it not equip you to do effectively? And maybe even like the things like the MBA and the engineering background as well. Like talk to us about that.
For me in this day and age, especially kind of starting out in the kind of the HR technology and systems background, there's no substitute for understanding technology, especially these days. Mm-hmm. And HR was one of the ones that was by far the furthest behind everything else, right? FP&A has been around a while, and even some of the marketing analytics has been around, since after Don Draper died, right? So HR is by far one of the ones that is just kind of still coming up. And I say that because I've been in this space for almost 20 years. And we've been saying that exact same thing, like HR analytics or people analytics. It's, we're right there on the cusp. And I think we still are out there on the cusp because, I probably like you guys do, I still have to explain some of what I do to my friends. And they're like, really? I didn't know that. Somewhat defeating, but I usually get past it pretty quickly. But that helps, that background in technology and analytics and business helps you to be able to speak clearly, articulately with your other C-suite peers. So one of the things we talked about, before was when you're competing for budget, when you're competing for, the thriving business that you want to grow, right? You've got to be able to speak about operations. You've got to be able to speak about IT and finance and strategy. And if you come to the table lacking an understanding of the other aspects of the business, then you're already behind because you can't speak to why something that you want to do, a strategic initiative, would be as important or more important than a new IT system or a new supply chain or something else in the strategy. So you've got to be able to compete at that level, and they've got to the other peers have to take you seriously, and you've got to convince them. So having that analytics background, being able to have a truth, a data set, a point of view on all that gets you into the conversation a lot more than if you were just to come with an HR background. Now, not to say there are plenty of very brilliant chief people officers that I've worked with and have known that learn that and bring that without having kind of an analytics background. But I just think for kind of going forward, the chief people officers of the future will certainly have a heavy understanding of analytics.
How does this play out like in a boardroom? Like obviously you're a super smart guy, you're technologically adept, all this sort of stuff. But like, is there a stigma against HR in that room that you have to overcome? Like prove yourself, is because things are not just like seen as like HR initiatives or they're just HR once again meddling in things that they don't understand.
Yeah. Again, in my point, to my experience, especially when you enter a new organization, or if you've risen to that level and now you're in a different room. If you're speaking to the chief operating officer, you've got to be able to know what they're doing,
Yeah.
what aspects of their strategy match yours, what aspects of their strategy don't match, and then be able to have what I call the pros and cons of why, at least an opinion of why what they're doing will potentially have the business do better or not.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with finance. You've got to understand what they're doing, where they're allocating budget, what their initiatives are in order to, again, fight for that budget to help fund some of the initiatives you're working on. I mean, it's well known. My first kind of large people analytics role, growing the team itself, was at Bridgestone Americas, which it's 70,000 people across North and South America. And I started with an Excel spreadsheet and under the talent acquisition VP to start its people analytics group in 2015. And so I had to grow it by myself, big borrow and steal budget, work with IT, work with the different partners, and explain and educate how and why we need to focus on getting these numbers, working them into the strategy, working them into the operations so that the business can do better. And so coming to the table at those points is just huge.
I'd love to hear both of you like kind of compare notes. Like I'm someone that doesn't deal with the budget, this sort of stuff. But I know, Cole, you've dealt with this in the past. Like, what would you say to like a first line or second line manager that needs budget? Obviously not all of our audience is CPOs, this sort of stuff, but a lot of them are like lower middle management. How do they fight for budget? It's like a totally different realm.
Yeah. From my experience, very unsuccessfully. No, I think what it comes down to is like and I'd love to get your perspective on this too, Dan. There's like a business need aspect to getting budget, and then there's like a political aspect to getting budget. Mm-hmm. And then there's kind of the business as usual aspect. Like usually it's pretty easy if you had budget last year to get the same budget for next year.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. And so there's an aspect of inertia to it as well. But if you're looking for additional budget, or if times are like they are right now where budget is being cut, that is where the ability to build a business case and the ability to be very politically savvy is of a paramount. And most middle managers aren't very good at it, or they don't even know what game they're playing. It's not just that they're playing again. They don't even know that the game is being played. And that's the most challenging part. What would you say, Dan?
Oh, you're spot on there. And as I was thinking about kind of preparing for this, one of the things I came across was one of my first presentations for a new HR analytics system. I'd built enough in Excel, and then I transferred it to Tableau, and we were beginning to scale it, but it just got too cumbersome to manage. So I went to the HR kind of budget committee, was talking about this, and I came in with I think it was like a 1,700% ROI, and they just looked at me like, you can't come in here with that. Like that's the most ridiculous ROI. That's not really an ROI. And I finally learned that, coming with the ROI versus coming with a break even was a better thing, because listen, we make this money and we can make it back in like 8 months. And then if we keep it for 3 years, this is kind of what we earn back. And so there's all that aspects. And while that did work a little bit, what I really learned after that is the bartering aspects, so the political aspects. So you have to know what your other peers are asking for and where your resources align, where your incentives align, where your aspirations and goals align, because you're going to need the group of individuals, to support you. And so if they're trying to do X, you're trying to do Y, you've got to find that middle ground in there. It's like, listen, if we do this now or we do this later, like let's try to see where we have some synergies and move together. That's the only way, I think, at least at a big firm, that's really going to happen.
Or a really important and valuable executive sponsor who might even be willing to pay for it from another business unit. Like those things can be quite.
That's another good one. I mean, I practiced very much within Bridgestone, at least when I was doing this, there was like 7 different silos, and I went to one silo and I paid all the attention to him, but he was one of the guys that was really, trying to run some new progressive business lines and make an impact. And so I partnered with him, and as soon as he told everyone else that he had all these numbers, everyone else jumped on board. But he was definitely more of an influencer.
Absolutely. Well, I want to change gears here real quick, Dan. I think you have some secret discussion topics for us today. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I prepared a couple depending on how much time we have.
Well, you want to hit us with one? You can't use the word secret and not get me excited.
Yeah. All right. So the first one, and this came up a little while ago. I'm a big Formula One fan, so I'm not. I do love football, and I do love kind of the other sports, but I really love football, and that's kind of based on we talked about this before, engineering background and just how amazing those cars are. So I was watching the Grand Prix this last weekend, and Max Verstappen is one of these guys that has this incredible win streak with Red Bull, and then the very next day or 2 days later, Moneyball came on, and I was talking about Billy Beane and the Athletics and their 20 win streak, and I was thinking a lot about that. I was like, man, at some point Hollywood's going to pick up on what a cool story People Analytics is, and how amazing Directionally Correct contributed to that line. So my thought was, Billy Beane got Brad Pitt, and my question to you guys is, I have sourced using your pictures what the internet says is the closest actor to.
This is great.
Jesus.
And I want to know, if you had a Hollywood actor play your part, who would you want it to be?
You got to go first, Scott. Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's like, who would you want it to be, or who would it be?
Well, no, you guys say who you want, and then I'll tell you what the internet said.
Oh man, I'm not great with actor names. Of course, you want like Zac Efron. I'll go Zac Efron. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they got to be more attractive.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that.
I'm definitely going with The Rock would be who I would want it to be. And then realistically, it would probably be with that, I don't know the actor's name, but the tall, skinny guy, Jared from Silicon Valley. That's probably who it really is.
Oh, well, you don't want I don't know who Dan's about to spring on us, but you don't want Danny DeVito or oh god, Steve Buscemi. Be like, oh, you remind me of Steve Buscemi. He's like, no, that's not good.
Yeah. So for Cole, the internet said, and I've only picked the ones that I thought made the most sense, is either Will Wheaton, and Scott would like this one because that's very much more Star Trek.
Okay, I could kind of see Will Wheaton rocks the mustache and beard, very cool.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And then it dropped in Chuck Liddell.
Oh shit! I don't even know who Will Wheaton is, but I know who Chuck Liddell is. That is a bad man, bad man.
Yeah, but then I thought actually Russell Crowe would actually be a really good one for you, but definitely more Gladiator era, not so much now.
Well, Russell Crowe's gotten fat now, so I think I could definitely pull off that now.
And then for Scott, we've got Danny Masterson, from the '70s show, and or Chris Pine, and I figured you'd like that because that's also a very good link to Star Trek.
Yeah, I'll rock the Chris Pine. I don't know about the Matherson. He's got a checkered past there, and that don't really associate.
Here's the worst thing, because I definitely got the worst and maybe the funniest one. So you guys all know Office Space. Well, Peter Gibbons, the character is Ron Livingston, and that's who I got.
Ron Livingston.
That was the best one. I've always wanted George Clooney just because of the the main character in Office Space. If
you had a beard, you could, or a 5 o'clock shadow, you could be George Clooney in a heartbeat.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I like to think we have similar names. A
little Anderson Cooper in you. I mean.
Yeah, there is some of that. Yeah, sure.
Good looking guy. Yeah.
So that was one of my secret sections. I have another one.
Well, I want to come back to something before you move on. You really think they would make a movie about people analytics, and if they did, Directionally Correct would play any part of that? Like, that seems absurd.
Why not?
You can't tell the story without Directionally Correct. I think that's what Dan's saying.
I mean, maybe it's an indie film. It might not be, kind of
not a blockbuster,
but,
not a summer blockbuster.
Yeah, it could be a Cannes Film Festival winner.
Yeah, we're going to Sundance, baby. This is where it's happening.
It's either Barbie, Oppenheimer, or Directionally Correct. Those are the three options.
What a weird conversation this has turned into.
Yeah, we can get back on track.
Well, I'm loving this, Dan. Here, please hit us with another one of these topics. This is great.
Well, one of the things you guys talked about was the anti-bucket list.
Let's do it. Let's do it, because I got a list too. But I want to hear Dan's.
My personal one by far is no more trampolines or roller coasters. I can't take it anymore. Whatever the inner ear sinus thing, it's just not going to happen. The other thing very relevant to work is I don't think I'm ever going to build a people analytics dashboard or system, from scratch ever again. I've done it. I've done it a few times. I'm pretty much done there.
I made a list too, Dan, and like roller coasters was on there. Not explicitly, like maybe like a Disney World, but definitely not one of these like carnivals that are in a parking lot. Never again. These sort of like carnies come by. I got Fly Spirit Airlines burned. Never going to do it again. Skimp on a crappy hotel unless you can help it. Never going to do that again. I'm never going to go to the club again. I was dragged to the club when I was in college and should have learned way earlier that not my scene. Never going to take some of these are like naturally. Never going to take a college test again for credit or listen to music on a cassette. And check this out. Never going to make a PSYOP poster again. I don't believe. It's a lot of effort.
Never again. Talk about a bad value of effort versus, reward.
Yeah.
But I think the one I came up, I actually completely forgot that we were talking about this, but I did get some blood drawn earlier today.
Ooh.
Any kind of blood. I have passed out, I think 4 times in my life from some type of either giving blood or getting blood drawn or giving plasma or whatever. And I never want to do that again if I don't have to. And the other thing is, Scott, your point about going to a club. Oh, I totally feel you on that. I think we've talked about before off the podcast. Like, I have this life philosophy. If you're funnier than you are good looking, don't go to loud clubs. Right? It's just not a good place for you to be.
That's actually not a bad rule. That's not a bad rule.
They're dark. There's nowhere to sit. They're loud. I mean, like, distinctly remember, like, standing by, like, the fucking door. And, like, people were like, aren't you having fun? Like, no. We're ready to go home. This sucks.
Yeah, and they don't get very good until really late at night. And I don't really stay up late anymore.
Here's one more. Trust that Thai food is not too spicy. Never gonna take this challenge again.
Yeah, I feel like there's a story behind that one.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like there's more there.
There's no aftermath story, if that's what you're getting at. But, like, order some Thai food, be like, all right, yeah, it's going to be fine. No.
It sounds like a potential blowout's about to occur. All right, well, let's do some nerdery.
The nerdery.
Let's do some nerdery. Where are you going to begin, bud?
I can go first. Let me share my screen real quick as I tee this up. The first topic we have today, I actually don't have a lot to say about it. I was just happy. But Patrick Coolin, who I think recently left, but he's been at ABN AMRO for quite a while, a really prominent thought leader in people analytics, recently got, I believe, his first journal article published in Human Resource Management Review with a few other authors. And it was called Understanding the Adoption and Institutionalization of Workforce Analytics, a Systematic Literature Review and Research Agenda. And what he goes through here, I won't say this is incredibly scientific because it's, again, primarily a review of the literature. But what he goes through here is what is the process by which workforce analytics, which I think you could synonymously call with people analytics,
Sure.
is institutionalized and adopted by different organizations? And I think this is probably a pretty good kind of history lesson of sorts, as well as they give some results based on what they find about ways in which you can increase the adoption and what things might be holding it back. I'd suggest we'll put a link to the article in the show notes, but I think it's really good reading for folks out there that are thinking about this from a research-based lens rather than just kind of winging it. But how did you all react to this article?
I'm interested in Dan's perspective. Yeah.
For me, and I've seen so many different types of, organizations, large, small, different industries. The number of pain points that you can relieve from organization is ultimately where you drive kind of the most value. So as long as people analytics has the ability to help with that, and you can consistently deliver, and you guys have talked about this a ton on your show, there's no substitute for being able to drive value by relieving pain points or looking at increasing revenue or decreasing costs. As long as you kind of do that, the institutionalization of people analytics will ultimately work, as long as people are open to including this type of analysis in their day-to-day workings and projects. Other than that, like I said, some organizations just aren't there yet. They tend to focus on other things. But if people play a large part of it, you're just going to have to do it if you're going to survive going forward.
I think that's right, and it's been my experience that like some companies are just ahead, some are behind. Everyone's sort of in the middle, but I mean, like there, to Dan, your point, like there seems to be like some sort of like obstruction to some companies getting ahead. But like, what is that? Why would that be the case? Is it industry? Is it desire? I don't know. Why would you not engage in sort of the people analytics process? It's a rhetorical question, clearly.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I have necessarily a response to the rhetorical question, but I think it's a good observation for sure. I mean, the way I'm thinking about this type of thing is we people analytics as a field are in a process of maturation. And so there was a period of time for a while where you could just kind of throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks, what's going to work. How can we copy marketing? How can we copy, these other functions? But as we mature, we need to get to a point where we actually have a scientific grounding for the way we operate, why we do what we do, what is important, what's making an impact. And I think what's happening is some of the folks that have been in this field a while are starting to push us that direction. And I think it's good for the maturation of our field that we are going that direction. I think it helps quite a bit.
100%. I tend to always try to start with kind of what I would consider the most valuable. And then, for me, structuring talent acquisition, making sure the talent acquisition operations are smooth, that's a huge first win. And then the second biggest one is performance. So performance management. I know, Cole, you've written some great stuff on this. Certainly with you, I'm more of a quarterly kind of update person. Doesn't have to be something crazy formal, but you do have to be able to talk about it. And I think the third part of that is, comes in with the learning side of it, is just teaching managers. Those are usually the first three things I look at in any kind of client organization that I go to. I want to understand how well those are all working. You need to get talent in the door. You need to be able to measure performance. And then you need to be able to have a high degree of confidence that your managers have the abilities and the training, to be able to manage people.
Are those typically the areas of deficiency? I mean, like those sound like foundational aspects you're referring to. Like, if you can get those three things right, then you can like really build a mature people analytics function. But are those also the areas that companies struggle with largely?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, TA, talent acquisition, workforce planning, headcount is, those are some of the biggest ones to begin with. I mean, the firms that actually have it right, I've seen a lot of them start moving to some of these the skill-based organization, which I love, and I know it's going to take us a little while longer to get that correct, because it is such kind of a complex, validation. Because to understand, does someone have a skill? Can you validate it, in more than one way?
Totally.
And then, the other thing I would talk about is, even if they have a skill set, do they actually want to use that skill set? Because I mean, I used to be really good at
right.
really good at Excel, but I don't really want to do any work with Excel anymore.
Well, I actually got a point about this skill-based stuff. We I was leading a session earlier this week talking about learning and development, which has a strong relationship to skill building.
Yeah.
And this question came up about what is actually like effective training. What is it usually like? What are the telltale signs of effective training versus trainings that are often ineffective? And the point came up was like training that is geared towards executing a business's operating model, right? So this is how we operate. You don't know how to operate yet. We are going to equip you with the things you need to know, the exact behaviors you need to do to operate the way the business operates. And that ends up being more effective oftentimes than skill building based training. And so I wonder if like this big push towards skill based organizations would be better served or maybe augmented by focusing more on finding the moving pieces in an organization that help it execute its operating model better. And I'm curious if you have thoughts about that, Dan.
Joke on here a lot about, kind of wanting to have, certain debates, but I'm 100% with you. I'm a huge process guy. Obviously, with my engineering background, I want things to run like as efficient as trains, right? And so knowing that any kind of given training, I think, is probably 80% that with 20% experience, because you do want people to walk away and be like, oh, that was fun. Like, I do that again. I feel like I learned something. I feel like I had a good time. I got some lunch, and then they're recommending it kind of to other people. If they can walk away with those two aspects, a greater effectiveness or efficiency based on kind of the processes and operating model, 100%. I just think that's the way, and I find a lot of utility in that. I found a lot of utility in just being efficient with my day to day, and so whenever I hear stuff like that, I'm on board.
I think what both of you are like kind of dancing around to is the aspect of motivation. Like you can teach someone a skill, but if they're not willing to apply it, then it's kind of irrelevant. Or like if you enjoyed your training sort of experience, that's really good. Like we want these sort of things to be enjoyable and employees to do it. But I mean, if I'm hiring somebody, I would rather have someone that would run through a fucking brick wall than someone that had the skill, but just kind of refused. This is a bump on the log, right? So I mean, like it's a different sort of animal, especially as we become more abstract in our work, technologically complex. Motivation and like just desire to engage in these sort of like learning activities, highly critical, and then apply them, of course.
I mean, you gotta get as much discretionary effort as you can.
Yeah, I've been known to say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But some horses, you can't get them to stop drinking either. And so you're looking for those thirsty horses out there.
Thirsty horses.
Thirsty horse. I like that. That's got a nice thought to it. Very Texas too.
Y'all want to bounce into a different topic here?
Yeah. What is it?
Okay, so this article is called "Feeling Negative or Positive About Fresh Blood." So we've all been, we've all joined new teams, outside hires, this sort of stuff, and obviously it can be awkward. And there's a substantial amount of research on socializing newcomers, this sort of stuff. And actually, Colton, I don't think we've ever really talked about that. We can pot that up for another pod. But what about those that are already existing teammates? What do they have to say? So the authors argue that when a newcomer joins a team full of veterans, this triggers a multiplex affective reactions, which affects team functioning. The authors propose that stronger negative reactions occur when a newcomer differs in their relational characteristics, such as likability, more than their task characteristics. So their educational background, this sort of stuff. And they back it up with lab and field studies. But really kind of interesting research. We don't really talk about the existing teammates. And when a newcomer comes to the team, we typically talk about how to ingratiate a newcomer to the team. Really kind of interesting research.
Yeah, there's definitely two sides to this, and I think the research is looking more at one half of the equation. However, one thing, and I don't know if the article really gets into this, but here's a quote that will drive any veteran crazy. Well, at my last company, we used to do it this way.
Mhm.
Why don't we do it this way at this company? Right. I think that's a really great way of getting the veterans to have negative affective reactions to the newcomers on the team.
Right. And in that same line of thinking, like, why did you, or they walk in and like, well, why did you do it this way? Or why did you choose this or something? It's just like, what's the old term, like, calling someone's baby ugly. Like, you got to be careful.
Those new ties to teams are exceptionally valuable. Like, obviously, why would you hire externally? Because you don't have that sort of information within your own system, right? That's why you bring in these folks for their experience and kind of fresh sort of perspectives, this sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, you can ruffle a lot of feathers when you're like, well, we did it this way, and so we should start switching up all the systems, despite the fact that these people have immense organizational history knowledge and where all the bodies are buried and why it didn't work here and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah. I always think of that quote from that movie Dodgeball. Here at Globo, Jim, we're better than you, and we know it. And that's how it kind of feels sometimes when the new person comes in. We're like, I was at a better company than you, so obviously we know how to do things better. And I, as a person who's been a new person quite a few times in my career, it is a fine line that you have to walk being a newcomer in an organization of balancing between learning and contributing, right? And I think that's really kind of what the article is getting at, is like, how can you maximize the amount of contributions of new blood in an organization while minimizing or while also maximizing the learning that goes on at the same time? And that can be a tough balance for sure.
I feel like I've read somewhere where if you enter into a new team, whether it's at work or anywhere really, you want to ask more questions than answer questions. And I think that's a kind of a good way of just a simple, good way of approaching it. And so instead of saying, oh, why did you do it this, you could ask, maybe a little nicer on that way, but, instead of asking kind of pointed questions, just be a curious individual instead of offering up your opinion too soon.
I think that's, I think Rob Cross talks about this, like onboarding, meet as many people as you can, ask a lot of questions, try to understand the business, understand your role and who you're going to be talking to. Absolutely. There's also an element of like the veterans. There's it's incumbent upon them to welcome a newcomer too. Like I've been
for sure
essentially hazed by people in a new team. It's like, what the fuck are y'all doing? Like, why are y'all like so rude? Why would you hire me if you're going to be like this?
I mean, I've seen this multiple times. Like we worked, several companies and clients really hard about onboarding. Finding an early mentor, finding kind of those extroverted individuals that are really happy to meet new people and that have a good network and can kind of come on. Like I'll just relate it back to kind of playing golf. Like if you have a regular foursome, someone can't make it, you want to add someone in, right? The person that brings in that fourth new person is like, oh hey, I've known this person a bunch before. Like they're great. We're gonna have a fantastic time today. Here's their background. Like kind of join on in, right? That's the type of introduction you want. You don't want to just what's the scariest thing? It's like if you're a threesome and you get tagged with a
rando
fourth golfer and like that you just never played with before. Oh my gosh, there's just a ton of anxiety there. But no one's introduced us. So it's tough to really know what you're getting.
Matthew Jackson talks about this quite a bit in network analysis parlances. Like the odds that a couple will get together that didn't know each other through a mutual friend, very low. Just because like you need someone to vouch for you, essentially.
Yeah, we talked about this in an article Shubha Gopal and I wrote a while back about the relationship between O&A, especially in onboarding, in inclusion, but belongingness, right? And why this has become a hot topic recently is because, to use your example of the foursome on the golf course, there, like I see like three different scenarios of the same thing happening. There's the scenario that you described, Dan, where the person kind of vouches for them, brings them in, and they probably feel that belongingness right away. There's another one where the person invites them but no, doesn't vouch for them, right? And so they still know one person, but the other two people didn't necessarily sign up for this, right? And then there's the scenario where a person gets placed in the foursome that knows no one, right? And all of those have different impacts on somebody's ability to feel like they belong in the group. Somebody's got to extend the olive branch, right? Somebody's got to be the one that says, hey, we're cool with you here because we're human beings. We're just glorified apes. You know, we grew up, we got big frontal lobes, and that's what happened. And so we've still got to think about these things.
100%. And that, those social norms and behaviors, we go back to it, like, kind of need to be trained. A lot of people kind of forget, or they haven't had as much training in that, or they're just not as socially aware of certain situations. There's no substitute for, again, kind of having a playbook on this kind of stuff. And I mean, I wrote an article not too long ago about onboarding, and one of the biggest things was finding that mentor, getting to know people, and ensuring that, there is a level of, introduction and, I'll call it, lack of a better word, assimilation into the group. But that, that needs to start with, kind of a networking individual to get you there. And I love O&A for this. I really wish more companies would use that more on this aspect.
And this is where, like, I'm not real hip on the EI literature, but I mean, like, there's a shocking lack of people's ability to engage in these sort of behaviors. Like, yes, there's someone new, you should show empathy towards them and ingratiate them into the group, especially if you're going to be working with them repeatedly for years. And maybe you should put everything off to the right step. Dan, how about we circle back to the confusion matrix?
The confusion matrix.
So I'll give you two options here as we round things out.
Okay.
You want to talk about public speaking, or do you want to talk about toast at weddings?
Oh, public speaking.
Public speaking. Okay. So I saw an article, and I think we've all kind of seen this, that people are more fearful of public speaking than death, right? It ranks as the number one fear of 75% of Americans. Okay. Yeah. We're all in positions where we've got to publicly speak every so often. How do you approach it? Do you get fearful?
Oh, I got nervous before this. 10 minutes before. It's like, and I've known you guys, and I mean, I listen to you guys every week, and I still got nervous. No, I think, but getting nervous is fine. Like, as long as you find your stride there afterwards. Yeah. I'm always nervous whenever I public speak. I'm actually most comfortable. What I would say is, like, if we went to a table of 10 or less, I could know one other person, give me a topic, and I'm extremely good at 10 or less people in a closed off room. But as soon as that room opens up and I'm speaking and there's no two-way conversation, my brain does freeze. Like, I have to have perfect notes about what I want to talk about in front of a group. I'll have to practice presentations 2, 3, 4, 5 times all the way through. Like, my words just stop when there's no two-way conversation. I just need that feedback, I guess.
I love this so much. I love it when people can, like, be real and talk about, common fears. Because, like, there's a lot of people that say, like, oh, no, I never get nervous. I just rock it. No big deal. Same way, Dan. I essentially memorize presentations, run through it several times because I'll lock up too. I hate, like, trying to remember little details.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? One of my biggest fears on coming on this podcast was simply that you guys have a far better, incredible vocabulary than I do. And hearing how some of you, in some of your shows, some of your guests, even you guys, articulate your points, I was just like, I don't even know if I could have come up with that sentence if I was writing it, let alone off the cuff, on a podcast.
I think that Cole speaks gooder than I do typically.
I don't even know what you guys are talking about.
Really?
Well, what's the biggest crowd you've ever presented to, Cole? Like, publicly?
Probably maybe over 1,000. I don't know.
That's pretty solid.
I'm like 400.
I've done quite a few so I kind of come at this from a different perspective than you guys. I don't think I have fears of public speaking, but I don't think I have the same fears that most people have. Like, I never felt like I was going to die or something like that. A thing I learned in adulthood that really was like my go-to move between whether or not this is going to go well or completely unravel, which has happened before, is like I always try to say something slightly funny in the beginning. And if I get a few laughs, and this is kind of related to the belonging point, if I get a few laughs, I feel like I belong, and then we're good. We're like, I feel included. We're all in a group together, and then I can talk to them like other human beings. If I get no laughs, we're in trouble. Like, this is about to be the worst thing that ever happened.
I think you're right, though. Like, getting those first few words out is the critical aspect, right? Just
what I think this actually might be related to the middle child point from earlier. When you're a middle child, you're always acting out anyway. So you're always getting a bunch of wanted, but often unwanted attention. And so I was always used to kind of being in the limelight of sorts. And so I just never really felt the same, I think, pressures that other people feel about being singled out. Because I think that's really what it is you feel singled out in a crowd, and that just doesn't feel good sometimes. And like when you're used to that, when you've had that kind of beaten into you, it's something that I don't know. I just think I come at this from a different perspective than a lot of people.
That makes a lot of sense.
Cole's a robot. He's a machine churning out them presentations.
I don't even know what I would do in front of a room of 1,000 people. That would just, I guess I'd have to come up with a joke. But I don't know what's worse. Like, I think I might rather die if I said a joke and then that bombed. And then, I don't think I could go forward. I think I just.
The hardest thing about the biggest rooms is if you have an echo, like if there's a system and you can hear your voice back, that makes it very, very challenging. But if there's no echo, I could speak to 10,000 people. It'd be no big deal as long as I got a few laughs at the beginning.
I find that like over like 10 people, it doesn't really matter. Like once you get past a certain number, it's just more people in there. You could add, 10, 20, doesn't really matter. But I will say that after I get done with the presentation and it goes very well, or, public speaking engagement, I feel like Superman. I feel like you're on top of the world. It feels so good.
Oh, yeah. It's like adrenaline going through your body.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or feeling like you're in the flow, like chicks on my high, like in the moment.
We have we have a little bit more time for a section that I came up with for you guys.
Oh, geez.
I should think so. Let's do this.
All right, so I'm calling this one the manager maze, and this solely came through to me because obviously anytime before I was a chief people officer, I really didn't deal very often with employee relations cases. But then as chief people officer of a 400-person company, like I had to start dealing with some of these, and they were very real. And so I came up with two scenarios, and I wanted to see what you guys would do. The first one is, how would you handle coming across a very inappropriate social media post from a manager? So individual contributor posted it, manager found it, and they come to you and they're like, what should we do? Doesn't matter, the style or type of inappropriateness, but it's inappropriate. What do what's your first thought?
Well, see, this is where you're kind of coming at this from the HR person's hat. And this is why I never really felt like I'm an HR person, because like this is the kind of stuff I like exhausts me to my core.
Yeah.
Like I'm just like, oh my God, do we really have to talk about it? So like I guess I would bucket it in two camps. Is like, did the post go viral and now it's affecting the whole company or something?
Yeah,
and we do have to like,
it did.
do we have to deal with it?
That's exactly what happened.
Or if it's just like a little private thing, I'm just gonna act like nothing ever happened, because like people's personal lives should be personal, and I know that's not a reality anymore nowadays. But this kind of stuff just makes me die on the inside a little bit.
Yeah, it's the tough stuff, and for sure, it's one of those things that I've come across a couple of these, and I'd be like, all right, I know what I think I should do, but let me just Google this first. And this was maybe before Chat GPT. I couldn't ask it.
I mean, you may or may not know this, Dan, but like just to kind of, we talked about this on some earlier episodes maybe, but like I'm not even on, other than LinkedIn, I'm not even on social media anymore, and it's kind of for this reason. It's like I just can't deal with all the people's bullshit, like
oh yeah,
all
no,
the time.
I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on. I'm solely on LinkedIn, and then the Instagram for golf tips.
Nice.
Well, and it's kind of like, one person's, terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
Sure.
It's like a lot of times, like one person's controversial social media post is another person's like freedom of speech, and like, I try to stay out of a lot of this crap. It's just not fun.
Not at all. But that's one of the crazy parts about kind of the chief people officer role is that, yes, these come across your desk with no warning. And yeah, can be intense some days.
You've officially convinced me to never be a chief people officer. Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, you have a team of people that can help make the next choice. And a lot of times, you try to bring some data into it just because, again, if it's all opinion based, there's going to be biases there.
Yeah.
And then you guys talked about this a couple of podcasts ago, but I guess it was about was it some sort of university chair head that was caught with manipulating data. And I wanted to know, what would be your next approach if you found, no one else knows, but you found some manipulated data? Do you become the Ohms bud, or do you? I guess the question is, like, you found some manipulated data on a report that could change decisions. What do you do next?
I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a middle ground to be found, but I'm not a middle ground guy on this kind of issue.
Me either.
You've got to correct it. Like this, like I have zero tolerance for that kind of thing. I even if the stakes are low, like we got, like, I don't know. I feel I just have really complex and negative reactions towards that kind of thing immediately.
Sure.
And I don't know if you've been following, but there's actually been a lot of stuff that's happened with the lady at Harvard that we discussed. So she sued the people that brought up the findings against her for like $20 or $25 million or something like that. And Harvard is in the process for the first time in Harvard's history of trying to remove her tenure. I mean, there's a whole saga of stuff going on. And if you really like the gossipy type of stuff, this is really a really great follow.
Well, I mean, like we've covered this kind of ad nauseum. The incentive structure of a professor, the publisher parish sort of model, would lead them to fabricate data.
The incentives really aren't aligned properly.
No, they are not. In a people analytics function, I don't understand why someone would intentionally fabricate data to make a point.
That actually makes me more awkward than public speaking. Like, if someone found miscalculated like error, I think I would rather be public speaking in front of 1,000 people than someone point out where I made a mistake.
Oh yeah, like this gets back to like sort of like need for competence and all these sort of kind of base ego drives we have. I mean, like a straight error, they happen. You change the decimal point. You used the wrong sort of whatever. You forgot to whatever. But just like straight up fabricating data for to like run an analysis, be like, haha, we got significance between these two groups. Like, okay, like why? Why'd you do that?
Exactly right.
Like, you could cost you your job. Why would you do that? I don't know.
I don't understand. Yeah, it's crazy to me.
Well, I think we officially exhausted this topic and episode today. But Dan, you've been awesome. You definitely exceeded my expectations of my hope of having you on here. So thanks for being a good sport. Scott, any final words for Dan?
Yeah, Dan, no one's called you a jackass, and we will continue that streak. We will not call you a jackass. Super pleasure to have you on, man. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. Awesome pleasure to be here. Again, keep it up because I need something to listen to while I wash dishes at night. So appreciate everything you guys do. Love listening to it, and thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate the ability to contribute to doing household chores. And you've been listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics Podcast with Colin Scott and Dan George. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Thank you.